Hi.
Hi.
Our intro's not working on now.
Well, here it is. Hey, welcome to TacoBagel. Thank you for joining us. We have a very special edition today. We have our first featured guest with us.
Yes.
And we're drinking mimosa.
Yeah, because it is Saturday afternoon and we are homosexuals.
Yeah.
It is necessary. It's been a week.
This is a special brunch edition.
This is the special brunch edition of TacoBagel.
Nothing queerer than brunch.
Right.
Nothing queer.
Nothing at all.
I'm Michelle.
We love gay people.
I am the taco to the TacoBagel.
And I'm Steph. I am the bagel in the TacoBagel.
And this is Derrick Clifton. Yeah. Would you like to?
And I guess I'm the lox and the ground beef today. I mean, and
this.
I mean, the colors are, giving taco
it.
and taco like meat and like lox.
Yeah,
I see it.
Yeah. I like it. I love it. I love this shirt.
Love
the whole. I love your grandma sweater.
It's going to be a staple until it gets humane outside.
Today we have a really special edition of this episode because we're going to be talking about a couple of different things that have been happening this week.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about RuPaul. We're going to talk about transphobia in the queer community. And we're also going to discuss a little bit about drag culture and how those things are intertwined with community organizing and activism. And
we're going to talk about the history of drag and the role that trans women, and particularly trans women of color, have played in creating drag and drag communities and drag culture. And also how, every single drag queen out there should just, get on their knees and bow down to trans women because it's kind of us that did that whole thing.
Right.
But, history.
And, just to give a little context, if you are living under a rock, RuPaul...
A heterosexual rock.
A heterosexual...
I think gay rocks have heard about this at this point.
Yeah, I think everybody has heard about this at this point. This last week, or was it the week before, RuPaul said something?
Recently.
Yeah,
recently RuPaul said something again.
Again.
RuPaul has been saying stuff for quite a while, right?
For many years now, Ru has been opening his mouth and letting some refuse spew forth.
I think for a while it's been kind of allowed and been brushed under the rug, but now it's gotten to a point where
now that he's on VH1.
Yeah, now VH1 doesn't tolerate that shit anymore.
No, they don't.
So, for those of you guys who don't know, Ru had said some problematic things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the exact quote. I think it was
something to the effect of that he wouldn't allow a transitioning queen on Drag Race.
Right. And then there had been some justifications about that. He basically said that the trans people that were on Drag Race hadn't transitioned yet while they were on the show, and had pointed to one queen who had gotten breast implants after the fact, but was no, when they were on the show, that wasn't the case. And if they had been on the show, he said that might have given them an advantage. So
because titties automatically make you better at drag.
I'm sorry, didn't what's her face have like lip injections and butt injections and ab injections, everything? The one that did the lip sync with the lips. I can't remember her name, the Japanese name right now, but it was all unfair advantage? I mean, that's the logic we're operating off of.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
It's really interesting because RuPaul also said something about how it was so important to him that the drag remain of a certain variety because it's a fuck you to masculinity. But then enables that same masculinity by excluding trans people. It's really ass backwards, I think.
And it's very just removed from any kind of knowledge or history of the community, and yet you claim and get praised to be a community trailblazer.
Right.
But somehow you are completely fresh when it comes to the history, yet you're seen in mainstream culture as this big ambassador of the LGBT community, but you're shutting off an entire segment of it because you want all the power.
Yeah. Right. To the point where this man didn't even know what the trans flag looked like.
Oh my God! Please look this up right now.
Yeah,
RuPaul
in the midst of his his faux-apology tour, decided to tweet that the only thing that Drag Race had ever screened for was like charisma, originality, and like sheer nerve. And he tried to Google trans flag, but he misspelled it and Googled trains flag and put the first result in his camera roll. And somebody on Twitter clocked him. I mean, look, RuPaul's people trains flag.
People immediately, because you are this person that like essentially
is representing a trans art form,
right? And you don't even know what the trans flag looks like, and so I think he ended up uploading a green flag. It was like a train.
This like green, lighter green, and darker green flag. Like none of those colors are in the trans flag. It was not even close.
And he didn't even like bother to like double check the Google search. Just quickly uploaded the picture with like a little.
Look, gotta seem inclusive. Gotta seem inclusive.
Somebody go take over his Twitter handle for the love of God. Oh my gosh, yeah. So RuPaul hasn't had the best week. He's doing a lot of unlearning right now.
More like you, Paul.
You love puns, don't you?
I'm a Jewish lesbian. I can't help it.
Well,
I'm contractually obligated.
One of the things that I think comes up a lot is this idea of like the history behind drag, right? And like I know there is so much politics tied into that and what that means for the community. Can you speak a little bit to how that's rooted in drag culture and how activism is intertwined in that?
I mean, honestly, what makes this even more shocking to me is the fact that RuPaul is behaving this way, even though anybody who knows the history of the community knows that trans women not only pioneered the craft of drag, but started it. So to even imply that on a national competition that a trans woman is less than or not a drag queen compared to a cis gay man is appalling, and it's erasure. That's exactly what it is. And it's erasure. It's erasure to the point of completely removing the agency and power of a community that already within the LGBT bubble tends to come out short, both in the mainstream and within the community umbrella, so to speak. And it feeds into this long-standing perception that there's not really a united LGBT community. There's like the L and G sometimes, the B and the T, because remember, let's look up the fact that bi and pan and fluid people also deal with mess from cis gays. Right. So I don't want to discount that experience or also discount the experiences of people like me who are non-binary, who also do drag. So in only centering cis men in this, you're not only excluding trans, you're excluding other expressions of gender and sexuality that are part of the community and have every right. And also, what about drag kings? They're cool drag kings. And gender fuckers, period. Right. That aren't in the king-queen binary. Right. Where's our space for them?
Yeah, and you don't really see.
Has there ever been a king on Drag Race?
Never.
Not that I know of. It's
never been a king contestant on Drag Race.
I'm not even surprised.
It's America's Next Drag Superstar, but they really should say America's Next Drag Queen Superstar, okay? That's the real deal.
And if we're also being honest, America's Next White Drag Queen Superstar.
Oh, wow.
Because after BB and Tyra got crowned, they ain't been actually, Baba Drag Queen was the last couple seasons ago, but you do notice all this whole gap for like a while between the second season and later seasons where there was like no black queen, and the talk in the media was that RuPaul was starting to get flack from the white gay audience being like, RuPaul only has a favoritism for black queens, as though white drag shows, like if this was Lady Bunny's show and Lady Bunny only chose white queens, they wouldn't have a problem. But somehow a black drag queen, whose show it is, picks two drag queens the first two seasons who are black, and y'all got problems, and they bit to the pressure because it was logo.
Right.
I'll leave it at that.
And and that's such a fucking slap in the face to the black, trans, like drag queens, like all of them, because that so much of that is rooted in black culture, like ballroom, like culture, like all of that. So like, of course,
it's almost entirely rooted in like black and brown ballroom culture, and white trans people were there, but weren't pioneering the culture in the same way that black and brown trans people were. Like we participated in it and we were present in it. But it's sort of apples and oranges when you try and look at the history. Like we were there, but being there is not the same thing as being a creator. And
yeah. So I mean, it's really interesting though that like RuPaul has kind of like unapologetically been RuPaul for so long and like has caught minimal flack for it for the most part.
From cis people, yeah.
Yeah. And
from cis people.
And the Drag Race has been going on for like many seasons at this point.
I think that I googled this so I could yell at people who still watch Drag Race. The 10th season is starting in 2 weeks.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
Not counting the All-Star seasons. And like, you know, how many of you on this show, probably none of you, are going to be watching that show in 2 weeks after you hear about all the ways in which RuPaul has just shat on trans people over and over and over again. Like, the reason that Ru keeps getting away with this, even though he's on VH1 now, is because a huge portion of his audience are cis gay people who are just like, yes, drag, oh my god, slay, we love you, queen, and like don't really give a shit about trans people, even though they're consuming trans art, and they're like gobbling they're gobbling their beers and like shitty bar appetizers.
Yeah.
So like an art form that originated in the survival of trans women, and don't give a shit about trans women at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's RuPaul's core audience, are like cis people who don't give a shit about us.
And also remember, even before the VH1 pressured RuPaul into removing certain words, and I know we're going to talk about this at some point, from the broadcast and all, but you can't ignore the history of how like there were songs RuPaul albums called like T-word chaser and all these jokes about with using the T-word, and I'm like, you really think this is okay? Like, I'm watching the earlier seasons, and I was just, like, squirming in my seat. They had this, like, lollipop challenge. We put their, like, mouths in, like, a glory hole type of looking thing. And they have to, like, lip-sync RuPaul's, like, songs. And there was one time they had to lip-sync the T-word chaser song.
But it was actually that masturbatory? They had to lip-sync RuPaul's songs?
Yes.
Oh, no!
And RuPaul picked the one who won that particular matchup by getting a lollipop and going down the line of the mouths, being like, who won? And he put the lollipop in the mouth. Congratulations. And then
I'm really glad I don't watch this show.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And I'm like,
oh my god.
So, like, it panders to transphobia.
Very much.
But it's given this free pass because, oh, RuPaul is a gay drag queen. How can RuPaul be transphobic?
Right. And I think that is such a, like,
that's just an
myth
example,
in the queer community, right? Is that, like, you know, as a cis person, on behalf of the cis delegation, I apologize. I'm very sorry for the atrocities my people have inflicted.
We're both choking it.
I would offer you anything, but I don't have anything to give. No, yeah, cis people are shit. And the thing is, like, as a community, we, like, really struggle with, like, acknowledging our own prejudices. And, like, you know, I think the best example...
Where are the leaders in the cis community?
The cis delegation really struggle. But, you know, so I don't know if you guys heard about this. Michelle Rodriguez, who is, like, bi, right? She's, like, cis bi actress, was on this cast, was cast in this movie where she goes through a gender transformation.
Oh, that's it.
Okay.
I remember this very briefly, and then I tuned it out because I was just that disinterested.
So she basically, I don't even know the name of the movie because it was probably so fucking bad.
It was just this garbage thing.
Yeah. So basically, what ended up happening was that she, like, went into this movie, and then, like, they went through, like, a gender transformation in the movie, and it was weird because people were like, hey, this is kind of transphobic, like, you should not be doing this. And she, like, went on an interview, and she's like, oh, I can't be, like, transphobic. Like, I'm one of you guys. And I'm like, are you trans? And she was like, I like guys and girls. And I was like, okay, but I don't even think you know. Yeah.
That's not
No, boo.
That's not what words mean.
No, boo.
Oh, God.
So yeah. So basically, it's really difficult for people, even within the queer community, to, like, dissect what transphobia is and how that, like, impacts the people that are most marginalized. Because we think, like, oh, we're, like, all oppressed under the same umbrella, which doesn't even exist in, like, the generality of the real world, like, outside of our
And, like, you know, in the meantime, we have Laverne Cox stuck on Lifetime hosting this horrible, like, makeup-themed competition show called, like, Glam Master. And, like, girl's better than that. Like, she's better than that. I've seen the only 2 episodes of the show that exist, and, like, it's not cute. Like, Laverne's better than that. And, like, the fact that people like Rue are getting these massive platforms to represent essentially trans people, but excluding trans people explicitly. And one of the only stars that we have in the media, Laverne Cox, is just sort of, like, shoved onto this B-list show. It's just this really stark juxtaposition of, like, how the media loves to use trans people and how we're, like, actually treated when, you know, defying all the odds and every circumstance available, a black trans woman, like a relatively dark-skinned black trans woman, like, gets some fame and notoriety. And here she is on Lifetime.
And in some ways, you know, it's a return to some familiar work Laverne had done even before Orange is the New Black, because there were, you know, it was a panel, like, it was kind of like the trans version of Queer Eye on VH1. It was a show called Transform Me.
Oh, I remember that.
Transform.
Oh.
You get, wordplay. Yeah. But no, it was like, that was my first knowing of who Laverne Cox was. When I saw Laverne Cox reemerge as an actor, I was surprised, because here I was thinking this was more of like I was seeing more of a lifestyle, beauty, fashion figure on TV that was evolving into that kind of, notoriety. But then, like, no, there's other layers, and you're a great actor, great actress. I use actor very liberally in general, just prefacing. But you know what I mean? Like, I see your point. At the same time, it's like, why is it that somebody must kind of return to a place where they were earlier in their career to remain in the limelight and to continue getting that coin? Meanwhile, RuPaul is sitting here making like a fat cat. Right. It's like taking it all in and just, and you know what I mean? It's just wrong. And there are no words.
It's so emblematic of the way that, like, the queer people view trans folks. Like, we're not valuable enough to get our own shit. Like, because Laverne was she was like headlining that lawyer show for like a hot minute. She had like some show where she played a lawyer on CBS. I don't even know what happened to that. I think it got canceled really fast.
Yeah, it got canceled.
But like, you know, she's like the biggest media related trans person that there is. Yeah. And
the most popular trans show is actually about a trans person that's played by a cis man. Right? That's your favorite trans.
Oh God! Don't even get me started on Transparent. On the garbage that is Transparent.
Oh my God!
Oh, that's. I've written like multiple articles about how horrible that show is to trans people, to Palestinians, to Jews, to people with basic human decency. Jeffrey Tambor is a rapist. Like, he's...
Oh my gosh.
He was, like, outed as sexually assaulting multiple trans women on the set of his show. And then, like...
I thought he was making people uncomfortable. I didn't know it got to the point
where he had sexually harassed them.
Oh, wow.
But did Jeffrey sexually harass, or did he rape or assault? Or both?
I think it was both, but I'm not, like, I don't remember exactly what the allegations were, but it was
I know there were allegations of abuse. Yeah, for sure.
It was some fucked up shit.
And it's really interesting because when he won an award for Transparent.
Right.
And got up on stage.
He won multiple awards for Transparent.
And he actually said it was oddly weird, but he got up and he was like, I wouldn't be upset if I was the last straight man to play a trans person. And I'm like, okay, so what are you going to do about
when are you quitting, sir?
Yeah, like, well, all right, like what next, you know? So it's really easy to, like, talk the talk. Like, but what happened? How do you follow through on that, right?
Well, and I think in many ways, like, RuPaul enables these sorts of things. Like, with the things that he says and, like, the culture that he exudes, is he actually perpetuates this atmosphere of transphobia in the media. Where when the one place where trans people should be front and center, trans women especially should be front and center, is on his show. And when he's coming out and making these statements about how, like, you know, he wouldn't know if he's going to let trans women on his show, you know, saying things like she-male and tranny and, like, you know, just being a horrible, horrible person to the entire community and getting away with it largely, this lets folks in the media know that even queer people, like, even we will not sacrifice our own icons to make a stand for trans people. And it perpetuates this garbage that's going on in the rest of the media, where trans people are just, you know, like, if we're mistreated, we're lucky, because at least then we're there.
Yeah. Wow.
Like, it's such a thing. And I think Ru there's a lot of responsibility that falls on Ru for that.
Yeah, and in fairness, Ru, after being pressured, and after a lot of, you know, trans activists, trans women, and queer folks really spoke up and challenged these assertions from RuPaul, then we got an apology. But at the same time, I'm like, was that apology genuine, given that right after the controversy blew up over that Guardian interview, you then tweet out something about people trying to be athletes on performance-enhancing drugs being somehow similar to a trans woman competing on your show? And I'm sitting here like, you make that statement, you get also called out for that, and then a couple days later, you really want me to believe that overnight, after so many years of problematic behavior, and I don't want to use the term problematic, but I want to say just repeat offender, just like bigoted behavior. Thank you. Let's call it for what it is. Bigoted behavior. Yeah. You want me to believe somehow in 2 days' time you changed your heart and now you really feel sincere. Like, I am at least glad that they got to that point of at least publicly apologizing. I'm like, how much of is it you really care versus VH1 tap that ass, you want to keep your show? Let's talk about how corporate operates for real. Somebody tap that ass and say, if you want to keep your show, you better get out there and apologize. Right. I bet you that's what happened, because that's what happened with She-Mail.
Yeah.
The network forced that.
And, you know, I think, like, so much of the, like, problems that had happened over the course of, like, all 10 seasons or whatever have been sort of brushed under the rug and, like, been allowed. But now there's this, like, shift, right? This is, like, an apology that came because of the reaction of the community, right? And it's like these people were upset and they were angry about what was being said. And it's like that, I think, is a signifier of, like, shifting impact of, like, community organizing and things that are happening.
I'm not even so sure that it was that, honestly. I think Ru apologized, one, because of what Derrick said, and VH1 was probably like, look, we're a mainstream company, like, we're not going to let you say these things on our channel, because they're trying to court younger queer audiences. Like, that's their demographic, is, like, young queer people, for a lot of their shows. But also because a number of trans queens and partners of trans people who had been on the show before publicly spoke out in their position as alums of the show and called Ru out this time, whereas previously that hadn't happened in the same way.
Yeah, it was maybe only a few people who may have said something like a Monica Beverly Hills or Carmen Carrera, because at the time there weren't many alums of the show who were trans during the whole She-Mail incident maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Right. Which is why, like, he was able to get away with using a word that has never been anything but a slur. But, like, now...
I mean, I agree. And I think it's, like, a culmination of all these different things, right? It's, like, maybe now corporations are seeing, like, what, you know, like, maybe they're like, oh, shit, like, people care about this stuff now. And, like, that creates a shift. And, like,
thanks, capitalism.
Yeah, like, well, you know, at some point, you're going to start losing money, right? If you're RuPaul and you've been untouchable, and then all of a sudden your entire viewer base is, like, pissed, like, you know, what does that mean for the future of the show?
Right.
So, I'm definitely, can we please talk about Derrick's shirt? Yeah, of course we can talk about Derrick's shirt.
This is a fantastic shirt.
This is a wonderful shirt. If you haven't seen Black Panther, go out and watch it.
If you haven't seen Black Panther, you're racist.
But... Yeah, probably. If you haven't seen it at least twice, you're racist. At this point. That's a joint TacoBagel statement.
Yes.
If you haven't seen Black Panther, you're racist. The more
TM.
Where did you get it?
So I was invited by an old boss to a private screening of Black Panther the night before it premiered. So, I mean, it was at the Evanston Cinemark, and we saw it at 7 o'clock. It was packed full of, like, Black students, Black academics, Black people from the town, the community, from schools. Packed theater with discount tickets, like, a month in advance. And if you bought, like, the ticket plus, like, I guess, like, a little, like, $5 or $6 extra, you could also get a Wakanda versus Everybody t-shirt once you checked in to get your movie pass and, you know, your popcorn and go in. So we walked out. The movie was amazing, of course. And there's room for critique, like how the lesbian love scene got cut out. That was in the comic, but also was supposed to be moving that got removed. But anyway, like, the experience itself was so cool. And then we walked out and we see all these like Northwestern kids like lined up along the wall for the first like late night showing of like the actual premiere. And I was like on Instagram being like, I skipped that line, y'all. Black privilege. Black privilege.
Oh my God.
I was like, hey.
Oh my God.
So I had this shirt in my hand being like, Black privilege.
Oh my God. Fox News snatched that clip up.
Oh my God.
Put it on. They're like proof of Black privilege.
Next week on Tommy Loren.
Yeah.
Jesus.
She doesn't have a job there anymore. She don't have a job.
Next week on Hannity.
Yeah, Hannity, Cassidy.
Jason.
Do you think RuPaul will give a more sincere apology in the future? Do you think Peppermint will speak out? Okay.
I don't know about Peppermint. I do not believe that we're going to get anything more sincere than what we got out of RuPaul.
Yeah.
I think RuPaul, in his heart of hearts, has the utmost disdain for trans women. I think that he is jealous of us because we are better at everything that he does than he will ever be. I think that he is jealous of the fact that we created the art form that he is now credited as pioneering in like mainstream contemporary culture, but he knows that he can never get to that level. And I think that he, even though he may be eventually forced to backtrack on letting trans women on the show, I do not believe that Ru's attitudes towards trans women will ever change. I don't.
This may seem like a conspiracy theory or an outlandish prediction, but you know how with, and I don't want to make the same parallel because it could be fraught, but you know how sometimes the most bigoted like GOP senators or congressmen are the ones who end up getting revealed to, you know, indulgerentboy.com and like have, you know, really fit cis gay white male escorts come up to their hotel rooms in DC. Meanwhile, they're out there pushing legislation and stuff that's destructing the entire community and saying the most homophobic stuff, but they themselves are queer and married to some, you know, a woman who doesn't deserve that kind of dishonesty, but there they are. Part of me wonders sometimes if RuPaul has some internalized transphobia and made himself, let's be real, because you got me together on that earlier, because a lot of us have the habit of calling drag queens who are cis, she, because of their expression while they're doing the performance, but that's not their identity. So let me just say it. Based on what we know about Ru now, I wonder if Ru may be trans or maybe suppressing it because they think they have to do that to be on. I wonder sometimes, given the whole career trajectory and everything that's been done, how RuPaul's gone on shows as RuPaul the drag queen, but also sometimes appears as RuPaul without the drag, which I didn't really see RuPaul like that until Drag Race.
Right, and I think there was, I read something earlier in the week where like Ru hadn't been seen out of drag since like until about halfway through Drag Race or something like that. And I think there's and this was all based off of an article that I read. It's because of the way that drag has been like publicly perceived, where like queens used to just be people who showed up at the events in drag, did their thing, went home, and people didn't know who they were unless they knew them personally. And people never saw queens out of drag. And then with the advent of Drag Race, that's actually changed the public perception of queens in towards more like being cis gay men who like put on these costumes. And I think Ru was actually one of the first people to do that. Which, like, you know, whatever. I'm not sure if he deserves any particular kind of credit for that, but it's definitely like there's been a conversational shift in the way that drag queens have been talked about as opposed to like these performance figures who are their character and like the people that's underneath the makeup and the costume.
That's real.
But no, I think that's interesting. That's interesting because like. In many, many ways, I could see it. I could see RuPaul being, like, extremely closeted. Like so far deep in that closet that he's halfway in Narnia and he's having some, like, Turkish delights and shit.
Oh my God.
But, like,
Narnia.
Like Narnia levels of closeted.
Wow. That's
like,
deep. Yeah, I guess that begs to the question then, like, are trans people capable of being shitty to other trans people at that capacity, right? Like,
absolutely.
I wouldn't call it transphobia because if you're trans, right? Like,
I mean, it's still transphobia. It's just it's perpetuating transphobia.
Right.
It's different,
internalized,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like how Stacey Dash behaves on Fox News, or
Ben Carson,
or Ted Cruz even this week getting mad at Beto O'Rourke. I'm like, Beto O'Rourke is from El Paso, Texas. You're from Canada. Raphael, because Raphael Edward Cruz is the real name, but you go by Ted and say like Texas sound less Hispanic. Meanwhile, the white Irish congressman who grew up in the deep southernmost part of Texas, you're mad because he's a Beto. You want to have a radio ad being like, you're only using that name to sound liberal. It may as well. It was a song. It may as well have been Uncle Ruckus's "Don't Trust Them New Negroes Over There" from the Boondocks.
Oh my God.
So I'm like, so it's that self-hate. It's that self-hate that comes out, and like I laugh at it too. But then sometimes I'm like, I'm like, Stacey, come on, get out of the sunken place. Ted, Marco, out of the sunken place. Maybe RuPaul's in the sunken. No, RuPaul in the sunken place.
Maybe RuPaul's in two different kinds of sunken places.
And you know what? This is the perfect transition into a new segment we'd like to introduce.
Oh yes.
Called Problematic Faves. Because I think I'm surprised we're not getting a narrative that's like, oh, that generation is like that, and we can't expect them to change because they don't know it better. I'm against that narrative a little bit because I feel like people are capable of unlearning things at different times in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And it is harder for people who are maybe older to...
How old is Ru anyway?
Older, for
I want to say RuPaul is in the 50s.
I was going to say 50s.
We can look it up. We
will use the power of technology.
We will.
Yeah.
Quickly.
Oh, wait, no.
RuPaul, that's me. RuPaul age. 57 years old.
Oh, wow.
Wow. That is closer to 60.
Damn, I did not know Ru was that old.
Wow, yeah.
But
then maybe this is the most genuine apology we're gonna get from a 57-year-old. Like, I don't know. That's a lot of years of internalized.
It's a long.
Yeah, like it's a lot of everything. I would say.
I also that's true. I also am not a huge fan of the argument that just because older people have been transphobic for a long time that they can't understand trans people and genuinely learn. There is a certain point, especially because we generally see that argument used for older cis straight people who have been so embedded in cisness and so embedded in heterosexuality and usually in religion as well that they can't break out of their bigoted box. I'm not sure that Ru has access to that argument, honestly, because being somebody who came out of the club scene in New York, which was full of trans people, being somebody who has pioneered the contemporary image of drag, which is full of trans people still, just shoved to the bottom. I'm not sure if RuPaul has access to the argument that he just doesn't know any better. Mm-hmm. He's been around trans people his whole life. His whole life. And he, if he's still at this point, I don't know.
Brishon 6 decades to know better.
Right.
Brishon Curran says, I think there's a combination of him being transphobic for so long and nobody's checking him for so long. Ru ain't got much longer and nobody's really going to try to change him before he dies.
Damn!
That is very, very valid. I mean, I think that speaks to a good point. It's why are we investing all this energy in people who are probably going to be gone in the next 10 to 20 years, right? Right now, our focus needs to be conditioning youth to understand what all of this means and how we can create a more tolerant society, a more supportive society. Because we talked about youth in our last segment, but they really are out here. They're leading movements. They're organizing. They're pushing for legislation. They have so much unbelievable power, and so
that's actually I think exactly why we need to hold Ru accountable, because RuPaul has taken drag into this particular contemporary place in culture and made it as mainstream as it has ever been in the history of the art form. He's also taken it to an extremely cisgender, extremely white place. Drag has now become this thing where little tiny 5-year-old white boys. Have you heard about that boy? That little white boy who runs around and is a drag queen and gets all sorts of praise from drag communities.
I've never heard.
I've seen it. It's a little video online.
He went viral last, either at the end of last year, or like the middle of last year, where there's this little white boy from New York who is basically a drag queen and is like, oh my god, it's fabulous, and he's like this little kid.
What's the kid's name?
His drag name is Lactatia.
Yeah.
Lactatia.
I had some questions
Kids
about the
these
name.
Days.
Right.
Yeah, but everybody
this
in the
is what-
community has come out in support of this.
Right. Well, and I think that is a problem because it's not so much a problem in like let this little kid do whatever they want, because let kids do whatever they want. I think the problem is that this little white, let's be honest, twink-looking boy, like this if this kid isn't already out, this kid will be out within the next few years. Like, this little white boy is getting all sorts of credit as being like the future of what drag looks like. And that's not like, I think we're reaching a threshold at which this is the image of drag that most young people have.
But I think that's complicated, right? And I'm going to speak from, I think, the toxic masculinity that is very much embedded in I think Black and brown culture, right? That doesn't allow the space for youth to express themselves in that capacity, right? I mean, you were younger. I don't know, at what age were you comfortable even coming out, or being who you are now? At the expense of feeling like you weren't going to be ostracized by your community, what does that look like? I feel like, at least in the Latino community, there's so much machismo, there's so much of that going on. It's hard and it's difficult for a little brown boys or little brown girls or anybody in between to have space for that.
And that's why Moonlight was so powerful for a lot of people, but especially, I watched it twice because of how wrenching it was to watch what in many ways is my own experience on screen, though I will have to acknowledge the class privilege of being able to grow up, for the most part, for a good bit of time, but not the whole time, middle class in Chicago, and have two parents around and family, whereas Chiron didn't have that. But at the same time, even still, we didn't leave the hood, you know what I mean? So it was having to go through people trying to teach you how to be a man, even if that's not how you identify, because they see it as you are a Black man in America. And because you're Black, that means you don't have as much agency as a white man, and your masculinity is going to be challenged. That is all you have. You must keep it because we need you to take on that kind of level of bigotry from problematic, racist white men. Because they've always been undermining black male and Black female agency for decades, period, through slavery up until now. So it's not only about being queer and open with yourself, it's also being about what is my role in the community to stand up against white supremacy. But what I've come to find out is that I can be queer, I can be gender queer, fabulous femme when I want to be, masc when I want to be, myself when I want to be, and still challenge white supremacy. But I learned that from Black, queer, and trans and pan-bi-fluid activists who I could see myself and identify with. And I think that's the difference. RuPaul isn't giving me that.
Right.
And we're both Black. Now skinfolk, gay kinfolk.
I think that's actually that's really perfectly the nuance that I was trying to touch on earlier, is the issue isn't that this is a little boy, it's that it's a little white boy. Where if this kid who was being lauded as the future of drag was a little Black boy or a little brown boy, I think that would be significantly different. But it's this little privileged white boy from, I think, from the East Coast, and that's being sort of turned into what drag is now. Where this kid's appearing at conventions and shit, and speaking as an expert on drag, and I think that's very different than what you're talking about with the kind of representation that folks get from Moonlight, where it's not a white queer experience, and drag is being turned not necessarily 100% by Ru, but by the culture that Ru produces into this sort of whitewashed thing, and it's being brought into cisness, it's being brought into whiteness in a way that makes it increasingly inaccessible for younger trans people who can't see themselves in an art form that was designed specifically for them to be safe.
Yes.
And I think that's the real tragedy of this. Aside from what all the horrible things that RuPaul has said and done, is that drag is now for young gay people and not for young trans people anymore.
That is a big distinction. I'm happy you said that.
Yeah, because like this is what drag was. It was the only place that young trans people and predominantly trans women could go and be themselves in, environments that were otherwise overtly hostile to them.
So if we can make, and maybe this is what the discussion needs to happen, is in some ways cis gay men doing drag a form of cultural appropriation?
I think absolutely it is.
Because my thing is, and I've read about cultural appropriation in terms of race and ethnicity, right? And about how people like Iggy Azalea think they can just parachute into Black communities, get our dialect, get our cool, be trained by people who are aiders and abettors, like what T.I. was until he came to his senses and, did the Heisman, basically said, I'm going to give you some distance, Iggy. But which is it's just 3 feet, no pressure. But you know what I mean? It took us some time to have that conversation about how can you be white and still engage in rap, hip hop, an art form that was created for Black and brown people who were struggling in this country based on class and white supremacy, to have a space and a platform to speak from their experiences in a way that honored their ancestral rhythms, their sayings, their doings, and the sounds from the community, right? And if trans people and, non-binary people are at the center of creating this art form, should gay cis folks not respect it in that identity enough to say, we have been brought into this space. Yes, we are dominating the space now based on sheer numbers and how things are represented. But what can we do to recenter trans and queer folks who created this and say, you know what? We're going to respect that and we're going to operate in a way that is inclusive because we don't own the power. We were granted the power.
Right.
And we need to relinquish that. But people don't like relinquishing power until, of course, there's a demand to.
Right. And I think that's exactly the case. I think that drag is a form of cultural appropriation when done by cis people is a hill that I will die on. But I think absolutely it is. And I agree 100%. I think that's the biggest shift that's taken place in drag culture right now is that it's now about cis people. And I think that, I would even go as far as to say that when cis people do drag, any cis person does drag in a way that doesn't directly reference and credit the trans women that pioneered it, it's a form of transphobia in addition to cultural appropriation. Because it's not only a theft, it's an erasure that's intentional on top of the theft. And I think that's I'm really glad you brought that up. I think that's absolutely an issue that should be at play here. And I think it's very much indicative of how little actual cultural power that trans people have, even though we have a lot of immense political power and a lot of immense movement building capacity and mothering capacity in very many ways in our own communities. And I use mothering very generally as this term for parenting, but also referencing directly that it was trans women that did this. I think aside from the influence that we have in our own communities, our cultural capital is limited. And I think this is one of those ways where it's very apparent that our cultural capital is limited because we aren't able to say, no, look, this is ours. And we aren't able to lay our historical claim to an art form that belongs to us in the same way that Black people have been able to speak out against white people like Iggy Azalea doing rap. And it's the same way that Native people have been speaking out for a very long time, but more recently have gained a lot more mainstream attention for cultural appropriation and cultural theft.
Yeah, and red face.
Right. And yeah. And I think trans people, we haven't, for whatever reason, and whatever combination of reasons, we haven't gotten to that space of cultural power yet because we haven't been able to make that claim. Or we haven't wanted to.
Or there have been barriers to people who have wanted to step out and have a show like a RuPaul's Drag Race, but because they weren't popular or mainstream enough, they did not have the access to gain cultural capital that a cis gay man like RuPaul can get because he is seen as acceptable by a certain category of people who have broken and entered into Hollywood for decades, who have been mostly gay white men.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can appeal to that mentality and that mindset, you can get access to like a show on a network that's owned by Viacom. No shade to Viacom, they have good programs. So I'm just saying, in terms of the barriers that people have to entry, especially for marginalized communities,
Mm-hmm.
if you are a Black trans woman who is well known within the community for what you do in drag, and you're up against RuPaul at a network, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to look at let's get some fresh, original, new perspective like what we got with Oxygen and the Prancing Elites.
Mm-hmm.
I love them. We don't always see that happen because the Prancing Elites were born from news stories about Black, queer, and gay, young people from like Louisiana marching in parades and doing drills and dressing in like fabulous like green sequins and long like, kind of like how Black women used to do. And they got a lot of pushback, but they were able to use that notoriety to get at least on Oxygen. But where are the shows and the big cultural moments that center and have Black trans women at the forefront?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really necessary critique to have of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And not just like center them, but also provide like a multitude of narratives that aren't based in like trauma or just violence
Right,
or
yes,
just like
exactly.
all this trauma porn that we see all the time when you have, like people who are casted like Laverne Cox. And,
Right.
and
I want to see
Orange
Laverne
is
as like the
Black.
next face of Drag Race, almost. Like, because this is like her historical education is her whole shtick. Like, this seems like, and I don't know Laverne personally. I have no idea if she'd actually want to do that. But this seems like something that would be very in line with not only her artistic preferences, but her political activism. Is educating about the history of trans people and shifting narratives about trans women away from the things that we do to our bodies and the things that we do, like, towards the things we do with our bodies.
Mm.
Yeah.
There's that sense of power and agency.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I think the only Drag Race that I would watch is a Drag Race with Laverne Cox. And I feel like she knows the culture as well. I feel like Laverne has spent some time in those scenes.
And I also feel like there needs to be room for other Laverne Coxes, right?
Right.
Like, she's
Yeah.
not the only
Absolutely.
person, and there's so many amazing
Absolutely.
trans women in the community and around in media just doing great things. And,
Mhm.
like, we need to make space for that. We need to create narrative for that. We need
Absolutely.
to create narrative for non-binary people, because that is something I never see in any capacity on any show. It's almost like being trans is, like, a little popular right now.
Mhm.
Like, you've got some shows, but you don't have, like, and you can always make puns out of trans,
Right.
like, so, but you don't have non-binary folk.
And
And
Ruby
there's a-
Rose ruined
yeah.
non-binary representation in the media. Ruined it. Did you notice this thing where, like, as soon as Ruby Rose gained even, like, the tiniest little bit of cultural capital, every other white non-binary person looked exactly like her?
Exactly. And you had some people who were most certainly and definitely cis and had no tie to the queer community being like, I'm gender non-binary. And it's like,
We talk about
being a
that all the time.
metrosexual does not mean you're non-binary.
Being androgynous doesn't mean you're non-binary.
Exactly.
We don't want the 90s back. Not in that way.
No, and that's where I get upset, because in a different vein, because most time, 8 times out of 10, I may look like this walking down the street, but that doesn't mean I'm not non-binary. Some of this stuff is a drag for survival in the spaces that I have to navigate in to try to gain some access to opportunities or to things where I may otherwise have a barrier. But I'm still unapologetically queer and unapologetically non-binary. But I just check it when I see it at the door. But for my thing is this, like, I don't represent the vast majority of non-binary experiences because there's not one non-binary experience. It's not perfect androgyny. And one thing I've always noticed in Black queer communities over time is that, and gay, same gender loving, because there's a variety of terms used that aren't used in white spaces. But what I'm saying there is, there's always been this non-binary or gender fluid element where you see a variety of gender expressions and identities embodied in that queerness, but it may not be labeled as non-binary. But you have people being like, I definitely transgress a gender expectation of a cis woman, so do I consider myself a cis woman? Not necessarily. But they may not use the terms that we use, like cis and non-binary or trans. But they still embody that kind of experience.
Yeah, in the Native community, they use like Two Spirit. Like
Yeah.
they have a lot of there's so many, like, it's interesting because it's like all of these terms like people see as very recent, but there's so many different like extensions of that in our history, in our communities. Like it traces so far back. Right. But yeah, like that's really interesting because I think there's this idea of having to check yourself for survival, right? And it's like there is actually an entire population of people that do that, and then there's another sector of people that don't even have the privilege of being able to do that.
Right. My little cousin.
Got it. But yeah,
my friend Jack Stringer, who is a native genderqueer person who operates mostly in the Midwest, actually has gives a lecture about that, where they talk about Two-Spirit history, where like Two-Spirit people have been around for fucking ever. But what happened was when white folks showed up and were like, "What's going on here? This doesn't look like Jesus to me." And like, you know, did the whole white thing, like the whole white Christian thing. Two-Spirit folks got hidden in the communities and continued to be hidden. And over generations, the language was lost. And now it's being rediscovered.
But didn't you hear homosexuality is an invention of the white man?
Oh, right.
No, it's really not. It's not. Queers have been around forever. They've been around really forever.
Forever.
Yeah,
forever.
And they didn't even consider it like queer. Like, you know, if you read history books about like Greek mythology and Roman mythology, like
they were gross, but they were gay as shit.
Yeah, they were definitely having lots of gay sex, and they were just like, oh, this is just our way of like bonding. We're kind of like, I don't know about bonding.
Right, it's like some,
the masculine bonding.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would call it pederasty bonding, but you know. But yeah. There was some gay shit going on.
Oh, yeah. There was some gay stuff going on.
So, with that being said, we would like to wrap things up shortly, but we do want to take a moment to acknowledge our quick segment, our last final segment called Problematic Faves.
Yeah!
And we would like you or anybody else to tell us, you know, we understand RuPaul is just like one player in a grand scheme of like
the galaxy of problematic.
The grand scheme of things, but all of us kind of indulge in things that may be problematic or may have like you know, unacceptable behaviors. And you know, we took a poll on the TacoBagel, and like 50 something people actually took the poll.
Right.
And we asked,
don't boo, vote.
We will do a question of the week every time we have a topic of discussion. And this week's question was, do you think RuPaul's apology is sufficient? And I think all but 2 people said no, it wasn't. And 2 folks said, yeah, like, let's move on to bigger, more important things. So, yeah, I don't know. So I guess the big question is, is the audience still going to watch RuPaul's Drag Race? Are you still going to indulge in that? And if so, what are the extent of forgiveness that we apply to different things? Because
so, why? And if so, how much money are you going to pay all the trans people that you know in order to be consuming that in order to be consuming that kind of media?
Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of reparations are you giving to folks? I mean,
but also like seriously.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
If you're interested in donating to trans-based organizations, Brave Space Alliance is one.
The first Black-run, trans-run LGBT center on the south side of Chicago.
Yes. And you should definitely check it out. That was my quick plug for that. But yeah, let us know. Who are your problematic faves? Mine is Kanye West. I know he's terrible. This man is terrible. Oh my god. But okay, part of me feels really like fucking bad that like he just spiraled out of control. His life just spiraled out of control after his mother's death.
And then he got Kardashian.
Yeah. He got Kardashianed on. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure he just felt completely responsible for the death of his mother. And like his, you know, everything changed for him. But his, oh my god, his music, especially his like older albums, fucking sick. I will forever listen to them. So that's my problematic fave.
My problematic fave, please don't trash me for this or dispose of me, but Azealia Banks. and there's a little story to this. Like I've always admired, even earlier, I would say early career Azealia, like was this insurgent Black queer siren who was unafraid to like rap about you know, her desire for both men and women, and to really muddy the waters of what it meant to see a young Black woman in hip hop, because there's this assumption that Black women in hip hop have to all look like Nicki Minaj or Lil' Kim, when there's a multitude of, especially queer rappers, who are amazing, even better than some of these female MCs who have been in the mainstream, but they don't get the notoriety because they don't appeal to the cis patriarchy in both the industry and some ways within hip hop. But she's problematic in the sense that she's, you know, in some ways she's been controversial for the right reasons, and in a lot of ways she's been controversial for the wrong reasons. Her music speaks for itself, but I really wish, and she's been doing better about this in the last year, kind of reining it in, focusing on the art, and righting some of those wrongs. So, you know,
she's also really young.
She's really young, and
I think there's a discussion online a lot about like colorism and how quick we are to dispose of like Black women who are problematic, and how much leeway and agency we give to other women when they're like unlearning stuff, right? And so I think that's also really important when we're talking about Azealia Banks. Like, you know, I personally, I mean, she's gone through some shit in the last couple of years. So I hope, like, I feel bad, and I hope that she is really getting the access to mental health resources and things that she needs to like deal with, for sure.
I heard she was anger management and completed a course. I was like,
yay!
See, I don't have as much excuse for mine. Mine is, because I am a white person and also a lesbian. Mine is Lady Gaga, and I know. She's garbage. I have no. I don't actually like a lot of her more recent stuff. But like, I also like. There's no excuse. There's no excuse. I will offer as a feeble excuse. I was coming out and coming of age with those wow reacts. Okay.
all those wow and laugh reacts at the bottom.
Okay. I will say I was coming of age at a time, and coming into my queerness at a time at which Lady Gaga was really front and center in queer scenes, and her music was really like speaking to queer people in a way that like a lot of mainstream pop music had not before. At least the music that I had access to.
Yeah.
And because of that, she sort of like got absorbed into my early realization of queerness, and I've taken some steps back from her more recently as she's become to be like kind of pretty trash. And
don't pretend you don't jam out to Born This Way every morning.
But also, giving me a million reasons. Stop.
But also, like, you know, I will acknowledge that like she was part of my formative queer years in a way that I can't fully distance myself from, even though like she's trash.
Kind of like Madonna in a similar way. Right. Who's like copied off of.
Right. And for maybe a later topic, stole voguing from Willie Ninja.
Yes.
You know what, though? I will say, of all the terrible things that Lady Gaga has been guilty of, for me, the worst thing is her dancing. She has no fucking rhythm, like, at all. And then they put her in that music video. They put her in that music video next to Beyonce. Like, that was just the end of it. I was like, what is this?
She's like this.
Yeah.
Beyonce's like this. And Gaga's like.
She was serving some Mr. Roboto.
We're gonna actually introduce every show with a Gaga dance.
Oh God.
It's gonna be like awkward and like.
My biggest beef with Gaga recently, and one of the reasons why I've taken so many steps back from her, is because she just refuses to stop standing for Israel. Like she's part of she had a concert in Tel Aviv recently. She's part of this like artists committee that like so many really prominent artists, I forget what it's called, but like so many really prominent media artists are part of. That's like this, like it's like the Artists Coalition for Peace or something, and it's basically like it's one of those like stupid conservative organizations that like uses a fancy freedom sounding name to just cover up the fact that they're being shitty for no reason.
Gaga knows it. She's pretty like liberal, right?
She has to know it. I mean, like, Lorde is fucking, 19, and she figured out how to cancel a concert in Tel Aviv?
Yeah.
Like, Gaga has no excuse, and that's one of the reasons that I've taken so many steps back from her. But, like, Gaga is trash. And she's become, as she's gone along, she's become more and more trash. And I'm depressed to see that sort of
if you're watching this Lady Gaga and you want to come on to our show,
We will take your money and also your solidarity with Palestine.
And we'll have a full political debate, and then maybe bust out into a synchronized Gaga dance. But yeah.
It's a telephone in me. That's between Gaga and Beyonce. Just saying.
We're gonna end on that note. we're gonna wrap that up. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you, Derrick.
Yes, thank you. This is amazing. Y'all are the best.
Yay! So we're so excited. Please let us know if there's any topics, any discussions you'd like us to cover. We are looking forward to having this discussion again in a couple weeks.
Yeah, we'll be back in a couple weeks. Remember to like our page, tell your friends to like our page, tell your relatives to like our page, and then we'll make them really mad, and then they will unlike our page. Go to our YouTube channel, subscribe, watch the videos. Do that whole social media thing, like, comment, subscribe. Yay.
Yay.
And we'll see you back here in another couple weeks. Thank you so much.
Bye.